He adopted 3 abandoned little girls, and what did they do to thank him 20 years later? Thomas Anderson had always been a man of principle, a devoted police officer, until recently, a loving husband. But after losing his wife to illness, his home felt emptier than ever. He buried himself in work, filling the silence with the sound of police scanners and the hum of late-night patrols. One evening, as the golden hues of the setting sun painted the sky, Thomas took his usual route home when he noticed something unusual. In the middle of the park, huddled together on a weathered bench, were 3 little girls, dirty, shivering and clutching one another in fear. Their eyes, wide with desperation, met his, silently pleading for help. Without hesitation, Thomas knelt before them. "Hey there, are you girls lost?" Silence, the oldest, who looked no older than 6, hesitated before nodding. "No home, no mommy, no daddy," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Something inside Thomas shifted. He had seen many tragic cases in his line of work, but this was different. These girls weren't just victims of neglect. They were survivors of something much worse. That night, he made a decision that would change all their lives. He took them home, not as a duty-bound officer, but as a grieving man searching for purpose. At first, it wasn't easy. The girls Maya, Leela, and Zoe were cautious, mistrusting of kindness. They had lived too long in the shadows of hunger and fear. Maya, the oldest, was fiercely protective, while Leela barely spoke, and Zoe, the youngest, flinched at the gentlest touch. But Thomas was patient. He cooked for them, taught them how to read and write, and, more importantly, how to laugh again. He tucked them in at night with bedtime stories, reassured them during thunderstorms, and celebrated every small victory, from Zoe saying her first full sentence to Leela finally smiling without fear. 3 years passed, and the house was no longer silent. It was filled with giggles, playful fights, and the kind of chaos only a real family could create. Though he never officially adopted them, in their hearts, he was their father. They carried his name in spirit, if not on paper. As the years rolled on, the girls grew into remarkable young women. Maya, the fierce protector, became a lawyer, fighting for children who had suffered as she once did. Leela, the quiet one, found her voice in music, becoming a renowned pianist. And Zoe, the most fragile of them all, bloomed into a brilliant doctor, determined to heal others the way Thomas had healed her heart. Then came the day Thomas never saw coming. It had been 20 years since that fateful night in the park. Thomas, now retired, spent his days in the same home where he had raised his girls. Life had slowed down, but he never regretted a moment of it. One morning, a knock at the door interrupted his usual coffee routine. When he opened it, he found Maya, Leela, and Zoe standing before him, dressed impeccably, their eyes shimmering with excitement. "We have something for you," Maya said, barely containing her emotions. They led him to a car and drove him across town to a quiet street where a house stood large, beautiful, and filled with light. "This is for you, Dad," Leela said, handing him a set of keys. Thomas blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" Zoe stepped forward, gripping his hands. "You gave us everything. A home, a childhood, love. Now it's our turn. We bought this house for you, it's yours, mortgage-free. Everything taken care of, you'll never have to worry again." Thomas felt his knees weaken. He looked at his daughters, the little girls he had once found alone and afraid, now standing before him, strong, successful women. Tears welled in his eyes. "I never wanted anything in return. Just seeing you happy is enough for me." Maya smiled through her own tears. "We know, Dad, but this is our asterisk way of saying thank you." At that moment, Thomas realized something. He hadn't just saved 3 little girls all those years ago. They had saved him, too, and now they had given him a home, just as he had once given them one. A full-circle moment built on love, sacrifice, and a bond stronger than blood. Thomas Anderson stood at the doorstep of his new home, the house his daughters had gifted him, overwhelmed with emotions he couldn't quite put into words. He had spent his life giving to others his late wife, his career in law enforcement, and most of all, the 3 little girls he had found in the park that fateful night. But never in his wildest dreams had he imagined they would one day give back to him in such a profound way. His hands trembled as he turned the key in the lock. The door creaked open, revealing a home that felt strangely familiar, yet entirely new. The moment he stepped inside, his breath caught in his throat. The walls were adorned with framed photograph snapshots of a life he had built with Maya, Leela, and Zoe, their childhood birthdays, Christmas mornings, school graduations, and even candid moments where they were simply laughing together. In the center of the living room was a large, framed picture of the 4 of them on their first vacation, a trip to the mountains where Thomas had taught them how to fish. Tears welled in his eyes as he turned to look at his daughters. "You girls, you didn't have to do this." Maya smiled warmly. "Dad, this is just the beginning." Leela took his hand. "We want you to be comfortable. You spent your whole life taking care of us. Now it's our turn to take care of you." Zoe wiped away a tear. "And this house, it's not just for you, it's for us. A place where we can always come home, where you'll never feel alone." Thomas swallowed hard, emotions threatening to break him. His heart, once weighed down by grief and loss, now felt fuller than ever. The weeks that followed were filled with an unfamiliar, yet welcome, sense of ease. Thomas settled into his new home, finally allowing himself to enjoy retirement without worrying. Every Sunday, without fail, his daughters would gather at the house for dinner, filling the space with warmth and laughter. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Thomas sat on the porch, watching the world slow down. His daughters joined him, each taking their usual spots beside him. "You know," he mused, gazing at them fondly, "I never had any children of my own. And yet, I don't think I could have asked for better daughters." Maya leaned her head on his shoulder. "And we couldn't have asked for a better father," Leela smiled. "We always talk about how you saved us, but the truth is, we saved each other." Zoe squeezed his hand. "And we always will." Thomas chuckled, shaking his head. "You girls have already given me more than I could ever deserve." Maya grinned mischievously. "Well, there's one more thing." Before he could ask, Leela handed him a small, neatly wrapped box. He gave them a suspicious glance before carefully unwrapping it. Inside was a crisp folder. As he opened it, his eyes widened. "Legal adoption papers," he murmured, scanning the documents. Zoe beamed. "You may have never signed any papers when we were kids, but we think it's time to make it official." Maya leaned forward. "We want you to legally be our father, Dad." Thomas felt his heart stop. He looked up at their hopeful faces, the love in their eyes shining brighter than ever. His vision blurred as he let out a soft chuckle, shaking his head in disbelief. "You girls," his voice cracked, "you were mine from the moment I brought you home. But this means everything to me." He signed the papers with hands that trembled not from age, but from overwhelming gratitude. And in that moment, it was official. They had come full circle, not just as a family by choice, but a family by name. Years passed, and Thomas watched his daughters continue to grow, not just in their careers, but in their own families. Maya married and had twins, Leela traveled the world performing, and Zoe opened her own clinic. But no matter how far life took them, they always came home. And when the time came, when Thomas's hair had turned silver and his steps had slowed, he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He had lived a life of purpose, of love, of family. Because 20 years ago, he had made a choice to take in 3 abandoned little girls. And in return, they had given him the greatest gift of all, a family that would love him beyond a lifetime. The end.